for those of you who suffered through rolling blackouts, I'm sorry. We even had deaths in the state, unfortunately. Now, here's the good news. On this program, we've got the great perspectives from two individuals about what did cause it, but more importantly, about what to do to make sure it never happens again. So, Jim, why don't you introduce our guests?
I certainly will, but I like the fact that you use the word rolling blackouts, because from what I felt and what I saw from a lot of my friends and colleagues, I think they were perhaps stationary blackouts, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest. Holding a degree from the University of Texas at Austin in environmental law is Adrian Shelley. He's the director of Public Citizens Texas office. This is a well-known organization that works on advocacy, including issues such as clean energy, environmental enforcement, and something near and dear to our hearts, Dennis, is campaign finance reform. Then we're joined by Pat Wood. He has worked at what's a company called Hunt Energy Network since February 2019 as that company's CEO. It's part of the Hunt Consolidated group of companies. In 1995, he was appointed by then Governor Bush as chairman of the Public Utility Commission in Texas. That's a position he held until 2001, when he then went to FERC, where he was chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where it won't surprise you, he championed deregulation and competition. Earlier in his career, also an attorney, he worked with the law firm of Baker Botts. Pat, I'd like to start with you and just ask, from your vantage point and your vast experience, what went wrong in February of 2021?
Well, I described it earlier as you got dealt a handful of cards, you picked them up, and they were all deuces. We did everything wrong, and it all happened in the same hand. But it's complex, but in another way, it's easy. We didn't plan for it. We weren't creative enough to know and to plan for a fact that our weather's getting more extreme. I think people on the right and the left can agree with that. We just saw a big shellacking yesterday in New Orleans. But the weather was intense. Our infrastructure was not prepared for weather of that intensity. And then our processes, particularly as you mentioned, the rolling blackouts that didn't roll, our utility run processes were inadequate for the task. And then wrapping all that was a lack of communication. Driving up here yesterday, I saw more warnings about a 78-year-old man from Plano who's missing in a Toyota Tundra. Everybody in Texas saw that driving yesterday, but I don't think 1% of the people knew on Valentine's Day that the next day we were in a 254 county winter storm warning zone, and that we would have the first snow in Brownsville since 1896. That's a big story, and nobody knew about it. So I think people do get prepared, as we saw a lot of our neighbors in Louisiana getting hunkered down or evacuating or some version of both. We didn't have that. So a number of things went wrong, Jim, all at the same time.
Well, when you say we? Who's accountable?
Every Texan. We who used our power, who left the heaters on when we went to bed, kept them at 68 instead of 62 or 65. We're responsible. We, the industry, the electric power industry, that didn't invest sufficiently in weatherizing our gas pipeline network or in weatherizing our electric generating plants for intense weather. We do it pretty well for the summer. We think that Texas is a summer grid, but in fact, Jim, we were going to hit a ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas is the name of our grid here in the state. We were going to hit an all-time record on February the 15th in the morning, which is certainly not an August afternoon. So we've changed. The grid has changed, and we collectively, as an industry and as a government and as a resident, customers, we haven't changed with it.
But one of the criticisms was deregulation. And you all did a program a long time ago, Dennis McCuistion. Let's see what you want to say about it.
Well, I appreciate that, Jim. And I want to say to that viewer, before you watch this clip, just remember that Pat Wood and I don't look any older today than we did then. And whether you're going to believe me or your lying eyes is another thing. But I asked Pat, among all of our other panelists, whether or not deregulation was a good idea. Here's what Pat had to say.
Absolutely. As the regulator, the dark side of the truth here is that we do a second best job, and the best job is a competitive market. And if there's a competitive market out there in the offing for all of us, and I believe that there can be, and with this bill there will be, then you really have a very reduced need for regulation. I wish it were absolute zero, but I think in the time of transition, we've got to make sure that when you move from a century of regulation, you can't flash cut to deregulation and have a system work. You have to have competition for people's business, that you'll have more than one company calling on you. And that's what keeps the services, the technology, the prices, the customer service flowing in your direction.
Yeah, that's exactly what Pat had to say. And Adrian, if I could bring you in now, you can comment on what Pat said. But your predecessor, Tom Smitty Smith, was on that same program, and he was cautiously in favor of deregulation himself. How much of this particular problem that we had in February was due to deregulation, if any, in your opinion?
Yeah, so it's good to look back there into our not so distant past and recognize that most of us were pushing for deregulation back then, and that we were generally of the opinion that there are things the market could provide us, right, that we hadn't gotten yet. And the theory was that, competition and the free market would provide us with the most affordable, most reliable product that we could get. And, the vast majority of the time, that seems to be the case, right? Texans, flip on the light switches, they plug into their outlets, and everything works just fine, right? But in February, we experienced a failure of the market. And it wasn't the first failure of the market that we've experienced since 1999. In fact, in 2011, there was another significant winter storm, and we had another large-scale failure of the market. And, that was the time for us to take a step back and to figure out where deregulation wasn't working for us, right? What was the competitive market not able to provide? And I think we learned back then that we didn't have a product that was as reliable as Texans wanted, that during some of those weather extremes, extreme events, we didn't have a system that was reliable or resilient enough to provide Texans with the reliable electricity that they needed. We had an opportunity back then in 2011. We didn't take that opportunity. We didn't put any more guardrails on the market. And as a result, we experienced a very similar failure just this last February.
Yeah, Pat, would you agree with that analysis?
I would agree wholeheartedly. We, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We got fooled twice. And in 2011, my former agency, FERC, and the North American Electric Reliability Council, NERC, wrote a report with a lot of specific recommendations for the state and for ERCOT to implement to fix what happened during that last really severe freeze. And those weren't done. And I think, to the current PUC's credit, they were proposing a rule last week that said, we're putting those in, we're going to make them effective by next winter. We're going to adopt this rule. What do you think? So they're on the rocket docket to catch up. But it's a shame that we had to cost hundreds of lives and billions of dollars of economic carnage to get through to that point. So that was a failure of government, of regulation, and of the industry.
One of the things that confuses and perplexes me is why, according to this article in the Wall Street Journal, that Texans have been paying perhaps as much as $28 billion more than if we were affiliated with traditional utilities. Is that an accurate number? And if so, why?
Well, it's the one time I've sent a letter to the editor in the Wall Street Journal that they chose not to publish. But Texas has, in fact, gone from 26th most expensive state to 43rd. Our affordability, as Adrian pointed out, on affordability, And on decarbonization, you know, Texas has gotten an A+, but on reliability, we took, I'd give us a failing grade. And you want to pass all three of those to keep people happy and keep your customers where they want to be. But no, affordability, that article, I had a lot of trouble with it, as did a lot of people in the state that know the data. But in fact,
We'll be more specific.
Rates have gone down for all three customer classes substantially in both the regulated markets, which City of Austin, for example, where Adrian lives, is a regulated municipal utility. So they're part of the ERCOT market. So you've got two places where you can save money. One is in the wholesale market, where all the power plants are competing against each other, where all the wind energy is really putting in a lot of competitive downward pressure on price for everybody. And then at the retail market, like I'm in Houston, I can shop around for my retailer. And Adrian has one supplier, the Municipal Utility of Austin, which is overseen by their city council. So there are two places you can save money, and that's been, in fact, the case across the board. The data, we took issue with the Wall Street Journal data, the group that analyzed it, and when I wrote the letter back, but they chose not to publish it.
Talk about how Texans have free choice, but hasn't there been a lot of consolidation to where now Vistra Energy and NRG Energy have essentially purchased a lot of these companies that formerly were independent? So isn't that limiting our choice?
If it were a true monopoly, I would say yes, but the barriers to entry to be a retailer in Texas were purposely kept low. In fact, they were too low that in the intervening years, they raised them up to require more financial backing and more technical operational experience for the retailers. But it's a low barrier to entry business, much like long distance telephone was a generation ago. And I think I wouldn't have a problem if the legislature said you can't get any bigger. We said that to the generators because that's a harder business. We said no generator can have more than 20% of the Texas market. That rule exists here today, and that's resulted in a very competitive generation market. We chose not to do that on retail because at the time we viewed that retail was a low barrier to entry business. I think it still is. But again, it's not religion to me. I think if there's a good case to be made for ensuring that remains not market concentrated like it's moving to be, that the legislature could put that in place and not disrupt the vision.
Adrian, let me ask you this. One of the things that I know your organization and everybody watching this program is interested in is service. We had on that same program in 1999 with Pat Wood, Tom Baker, who was with Texas Utilities. And I'm going to play a very short clip when I asked him basically this question. I said, you're going to be in a competitive market. You're saying you're going to lower your prices, and yet you're going to make more money. So how are you going to do this and provide the same level of service? Here's what Tom Baker had to say.
And service is key in this thing. Unlike other things, electric service has to stay on. We depend on it. When you don't like it to blink. All of you come home and those little clock radios are flashing at you and you can't remember how to set them. And it's very important that stays on. And this has to have at least as good a service and even better. You all are very patient with us when it goes out, and we appreciate it. Sometimes you give us up to maybe 2 minutes to get it back on.
Adrian, one of the things that your organization tries to do, you're a consumer organization, and I'm not sure if Tom Baker wasn't being optimistic saying we give them 2 minutes to get it back on. Talk to us about how service has been overall, not just let's just say the meltdown back in February.
Yeah, so I think, Mr. Baker was absolutely right. People expect their electricity to operate all of the time, right? And even that little blink, that affects people's impression of the product and of how good the product is. And, most of the time it just means, well, we got to go reset those clock radios, right? But in February, with people who had power off for a day, 2 days, 3 days, there are people who are on life-saving equipment, right? There are people who are relying on heating to keep their homes warm. It was a matter of life and death for hundreds of Texans. So, on the extreme end of things, reliable electricity is required for survival. But, back to the way that most of us experience it, we want a reliable product. And the vast majority of the time, we want low bills. What matters to us most is that the energy bill isn't too high and the lights stay on. But it doesn't take too many occasions where the lights didn't stay on before we start to think about whether that low bill is really worth it. And, just this summer, we've had a couple of days where, we were encouraged to engage in our own conservation measures, turn your thermostat up over 80 degrees overnight. And, I don't know about y'all, but I can't sleep when it's 80 degrees in my home, right? So, we are being asked to make real sacrifices. And now we know that if we don't, the kinds of failures of the electricity system that we are experiencing now can have very severe consequences for people across the state.
We know that a lot of people were surprised when they opened up their bills last February and March. Some of the bills went up at least $100,000. Do you think that there was some market manipulation in this?
Well, we absolutely believe that there was market manipulation. There are companies, there are executives who have bragged about, the hundreds of millions of dollars in profits that they reaped in just a couple of days while Texans are, fighting for their safety and their lives. So we absolutely believe that there was illegal market manipulation that occurred. We also know that some of the retail plans that are available out here in Texas exposed people to those, $1,000, $10,000 energy bills. People who signed on to an energy plan that they probably didn't really understand. It's essentially a form of gambling. And people lost in February, right? And so now we've got energy consumers all over the state who are going to be spending years, up to 10 years maybe, to pay off an electricity bill that they got in just a couple days' time. Something's wrong with that market.
Yeah, Pat, I'm going to let you respond to what Adrian said, but I'll tag on to that. The number that gets bandied around is about $6.5 billion because of something I don't understand real well about the maximum price that can be charged for gas if things go awry. Tell that viewer in simple words, if you can, how we should understand that, because while we as ratepayers and maybe as bond payers are going to pay for this over time, somebody had to have made the money that we all lost. Am I right or not?
Well, I think Adrian referred to some people that are not in the power industry, but are in the natural gas industry. Natural gas is the key supplier of fuel to our fleet, even though wind is coming in as a close second these days. Natural gas was scarce as well, and there is no price cap in the gas market. And so the price of gas that the electric generators, as well as the electric gas utilities and the municipal utilities, all those people were buying gas. Gas wells had been shut in either prior to the event or during the event for a number of reasons. And so we were low on gas, and it affected the entire central part of the country. Very extreme high prices for natural gas, which then in turn drove very high prices for our electricity. You mentioned $6.5 billion overcharge. That was reported from the PUC. The PUC, actually not trusting the market, intervened and held the price up artificially for 3.5 days at the $9,000 price cap in hopes that they would entice more power generation to come back onto the grid. It didn't work because there wasn't any power generation to be had. It had been frozen off or no fuel supply, or a number of reasons that have been cataloged here. But, when that happened, that did result in significant overcharges. The legislature addressed that in part by saying we're going to take those charges out of everybody's wholesale and retail bills and spread them over 30 years at a reasonable interest rate. much like we did the cost of the overpriced nuclear power plants back at 2 decades ago. But I do want to address, and so that's unfortunate. But I don't view that. I actually view that as a lack of faith in the way that the pricing was working at the ERCOT market. The legislature, to their credit, directed that they put a circuit breaker in place if that ever happens again and the prices run up.
Where does Texas stand with regard to other states, particularly with energy efficiency standards? And where we are not doing so well, what are the solutions to improve?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jim. So Texas, we're an energy forward state, right? A lot of the best energy policy in the nation has come out of Texas, and that includes energy efficiency standards. We were the first state to pass an energy efficiency standard. 27 other states have joined us. And now we're actually 28th or dead last among states that have an energy efficiency standard in terms of how strong our standard is. We met the original standard a long time ago, and we haven't set new targets. What is energy efficiency? It's energy savings. It's energy that you don't use, right? Sometimes we call it the negawatt, right? The energy that isn't used. It's the cheapest form of energy out there. And the way to invest in energy efficiency is to invest in local solutions, things like weatherizing people's homes or right-sizing air conditioning and heating equipment in commercial buildings, or smart meters that allow us to adjust energy demand for customers all across the state. There are all of these solutions out there that technology is providing, and the opportunity is just passing us by in Texas, right? We are one of the weakest states now in terms of our energy efficiency programs. We need to invest on that side of the equation, right? Reduce our energy use so that we don't have to worry so much about a shortage when demand gets high.
Let me go back to Pat then. Pat, are we putting too much emphasis in the fact that our state was built on hydrocarbons? Are we slow to adapt and to adopt renewables?
Not at all. I mean, we've gone from 0 to number 5 nation in the world with renewable electricity, thanks to a number of things. God gave us great resources. Let's put that first. Wind and sun, but also we've got an open market. You have a lot of people you can sell to. It's easy to interconnect a power plant, a wind farm, a solar plant into our grid. I'm putting batteries on the grid myself. It's pretty straightforward. So the market is friendly for that. A lot of customers like it. Our corporate customers, our military customers, school districts, retailers, neighborhood groups, whatever. Everybody likes renewables, and so that market signal over the last 20 years has probably been, I would say, the unexpected great success story. It's one that Adrian's buddy and my good friend Smitty Smith was really an advocate for it, and has really said that, he didn't have the faith, and neither did I, that it would be so renewable friendly here.
Well, Pat, I see Adrian shaking his head. Adrian, you got something to say?
Oh, I was agreeing. I agree absolutely. This is a state, we've invested more in wind energy, and we have more wind energy than any other state in the union. We've got just an amazing amount of solar energy in the queue, of battery storage coming. But we're at a pivot point here in Texas with our market redesign. There are some proposals out there that are frankly not forward looking. And, we honestly see some influence of the petrochemical industry in some of that. We see some protectionist proposals out there, things like, giving extra or premium payments to certain types of energy, to natural gas, for example, because of a supposed reliability that they offer. Texas is a state that has been willing to try new things, has been willing to move into new energy spaces, to our great credit and to the great success of the state, of the companies that are located here, and to the benefit of people. But we need to continue to look at the problems from a technology neutral standpoint, to not look to, prop up any particular industry, old or new, to look at solutions that make sense for people, with the goal being affordable, reliable, resilient energy for everyone.
Adrian, thank you so much for that. I'm going to play one last clip before I ask Jim to close. That last clip is from Pat. Here's what you said at the very end of our program in 1999, Pat.
We've got to make it work. It's the last of the great regulated monopolies to go through the gate. And if we haven't learned our lessons from the airline industry, the banking industry, the savings and loan, and the telephone industry, then shame on us.
Well, Pat, I agree with you, and I think Adrian does too, that shame on us. And we appreciate both of you being here. Jim, why don't you make the closing comments?
Well, thank you, Dennis. And you know, the way I see this, that what happened last February was certainly a unique occasion, but because of climate change or whatever, things like this are happening more often. I mean, the fact that 3 storms converged on Texas in essentially 1 week, I mean, that was essentially responsible for close to 500 to 600 people dying. And it's clear from what we've heard today that we were not adequately prepared. There's a lot of questions still about this consolidation. The fact that 3/4 of our electricity is coming from essentially 2 companies is something that I think we need to be aware of. And I know that we're going to continue to focus on this over the course of the next year. We need to hold our legislators accountable as well as industry. So to all of you, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your support. And as you know, Dennis and I are always here talking about things that matter with you, people who care. See you soon.